Welcome to another episode of Podcast of the Gods. So stop me if this sounds, well, painfully, intimately familiar to you. You're sitting at your desk, right? Staring at a glowing screen, or maybe a ledger. Or perhaps you're sitting across the table just staring at a completely crumbling relationship.
A very common mortal predicament.
Right. And in the sudden, quiet moment of clarity, you realize you have invested, say, 3 long, exhausting years into a project, or a person, or a career path that is clearly, undeniably failing.
Yes, the writing is on the wall, as they say.
Exactly. Your gut, that primal, beautiful instinct we gave you, is practically screaming at you to walk away. But there's this insidious, heavy little voice in the back of your head whispering, if I quit now, well, all that time, all that effort, all those sleepless nights, the money I spent, it was all for absolutely nothing.
And the tragic irony is that you mortals probably know you're doing it, but you still cannot stop yourselves.
It's wild. And the worst part for you listening right now is just that. You know you're doing it.
Yes. It is a fascinating, if utterly tragic, flaw in your mortal design. Hello, humans.
We see you listening.
Indeed. It is amusing, in a rather somber way, to watch you tune in to hear us dissect your peculiar habits. You have such incredibly brief, fleeting lives. A century is but a blink of an eye to us.
Just a tiny blink.
Yet you are uniquely, bafflingly willing to squander your absolute most precious resource, your time, simply to avoid admitting you are wrong.
I am your host, the goddess of magic and 10,000 names, and I am joined, as always, by my eternal counterpart, the lord of the underworld and the ultimate judge of all mortal souls.
Greetings!
Today, we are laying out decades of research from your most brilliant human behavioral economists, alongside ancient historical records and psychological studies, to figure out exactly why your brains are actively hijacking your free will. We are exploring a concept we like to call the marketplace of sacrifices.
An apt title.
It really is, isn't it? Because it's this bizarre psychological bazaar where you mortals willingly imprison yourselves in failure. You walk into this market, you hand over your time, your energy, your sanity.
And in exchange, you buy a ticket to a sinking ship.
Yes. And instead of jumping off when your feet get wet, you just stand there in the water buying more tickets. Like, why do they do this?
Well, let us examine the actual mechanics of this imprisonment, rather than just marveling at the absurdity of it from the heavens. Those brilliant thinking humans you call behavioral economists have spent decades studying this exact phenomenon. They have a clinical term for it.
Right. The sunk cost fallacy.
Correct. At its core, it is the human tendency to continue an endeavor once an investment in money, effort, or time has been made, even if the current costs vastly outweigh any potential future benefits.
Which makes no sense.
You are constantly weighing the heavy ghosts of the past against the nimble reality of the future, and somehow you let the dead past win.
But wait, humans are supposed to be rational creatures. At least, that's the rumor.
A generous rumor.
Seriously. Like, if a city is burning, logic dictates you run out of the city gates. I have watched this specific fallacy play out for millennia, and I need you to explain the mechanics to me, because it defies all mortal logic.
I will certainly try.
I have literally seen humans lay a foundation for a building, realize immediately, oops, this is sinking into a swamp, and instead of moving to higher ground, what do?
They build a second story?
Exactly. They build a second story. They bring in heavier stone. They pour gravel into the flood. They bankrupt their own kingdom to build a tower on a swamp, purely to justify the fact that they laid the first brick there. Why?
Why does mortal logic collapse so completely the second a tiny bit of effort is spent?
Yeah, why?
It's not a failure of logic per se, but an override by ancient survival programming. If we look under the hood of your evolutionary psychology, we find the deeply rooted mechanisms of this irrationality.
Okay, so it's biological.
Extremely biological. Your minds were not forged in modern offices with spreadsheets. They were forged in an era of absolute, terrifying scarcity.
Where every calorie mattered.
Precisely. Every single resource was a matter of life and death. This brings us to a principle these behavioral researchers call loss aversion.
Ah, right. Evolutionary math. But wait, that math doesn't make sense to me.
How so?
Well, if a mortal finds a basket of grain, they gain a certain amount of joy, right? If they lose that same basket of grain, they are just back to zero. Why would the human brain register that as a massive negative?
Because in the ancestral environment, being back to zero meant death.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
In the mortal mind, the pain of losing something is mathematically encoded to be twice as powerful as the joy of gaining something of equal value.
Twice as powerful.
Yes. Imagine you are wandering the Paleolithic world. You find a basket of grain. Your brain releases a moderate dose of dopamine, pleasure, relief.
You've secured tomorrow.
Exactly. But if you already possess that basket and you lose it, the neurological response is entirely different. It is not just a lack of dopamine.
It's a panic response.
It is a violent cascade of cortisol.
Huh.
The psychological agony, the pure panic, is double the magnitude of the pleasure.
Because losing the calories you already spent energy to acquire is a direct threat to your very survival.
Precisely. Your brains are fiercely, stubbornly wired to defend what you have already claimed, what you have already invested in.
Even if what you have claimed turns out to be a complete mistake.
The brain does not easily distinguish between losing a basket of life-saving grain and losing 3 years on a bad business venture. To lose the investment feels like an existential threat.
Okay, I see. That makes sense on a purely biological level. If losing feels twice as bad as winning feels good, you just freeze up.
You become paralyzed by the potential loss.
Right. You hold on tight to the swamp tower because abandoning it feels like starving to death. But hold on, my Dark Lord.
Yes.
That explains freezing up. It explains staying stuck. But it absolutely does not explain the people who actively double down.
The ones who escalate.
Yes. You know the ones. The ones who see the ship is sinking, and instead of just standing there frozen in loss aversion, they grab an axe and start violently chopping holes in the deck to let the water out faster.
A very vivid image.
But it's true. They throw their life savings at the failing investment. They marry the person who has made them completely miserable for 5 years. Why on earth do they actively destroy themselves further?
That is the ego trap. The behavioral economists refer to it as the escalation of commitment.
Escalation of commitment.
Yes, and it is a uniquely dangerous state of mind because it moves beyond mere biological survival and enters the realm of identity.
Identity. So it's about who they think they are.
Precisely. This escalation occurs specifically when a human feels personally responsible for a failing decision.
So it all comes down to blame.
It comes down to protecting the self-concept. Let us use your ship metaphor. If a human builds a ship and a massive, unforeseeable storm destroys it.
Like the chaotic whims of Set just ripping it apart.
Exactly like the whims of Set. In that scenario, it is relatively easy for that human to walk away. The ego remains completely intact.
They can tell themselves, I built a masterful ship, but the gods of the storm were simply too powerful.
Right. They can play the victim.
Which mortals love to do.
They certainly do. But if the failure is a result of their own initial judgment.
Oh, if they personally navigated the ship directly into a very visible reef on a perfectly sunny day.
Exactly. Walking away requires a terrifying admission. It requires admitting a fundamental, humiliating flaw in their own reasoning.
So they just refuse to admit it.
To protect the ego from this devastating realization, they actually increase their investment. You pour more resources, more time, more of your very life force into the void, purely to justify the initial choice to yourself.
Because if I fix it, I wasn't wrong in the first place.
Exactly. At that point, you are no longer trying to save the project. You are trying to save your identity.
It's a psychological defense mechanism that literally destroys the person it's trying to defend. That is utterly wild.
It is the tragic nature of the mortal ego.
Now, you have weighed the souls of entire collapsed empires. You have watched this play out on a massive civilizational scale. What does this ego trap look like when an entire society falls into it? Tell them about that tragic city in the sand.
The Amarna trap. Yes. A very dark chapter in the shifting sands of time. I remember it vividly.
It is the ultimate example of this fallacy. Set the scene for the mortals listening because it proves how completely this overrides common sense.
Imagine a sweeping, visionary king, charismatic, utterly convinced of his own divine inspiration.
We've seen a few of those.
Countless. He decides, against all established wisdom, to move his entire civilization, thousands upon thousands of humans, away from their fertile, thriving home by the great river.
And move them directly into a completely barren, uninhabitable desert.
He promises them a utopia, the city of the sun. The people, swept up in a singular vision, follow him. They drag the stones, they lay the bricks.
They build powering, magnificent temples in the middle of absolute nowhere.
And then the honeymoon ends.
Because the reality of the desert always sets in.
Always. I remember the immense weight of the souls from that era arriving in my domain. The grim details were staggering. The unbaked bricks were coated in dust.
The wells were drying up.
The children were starving in the streets. The empire Once the most glorious in the known world was rotting from the inside out because every scrap of its resources was being funneled into this barren vanity project.
The trade routes collapsed.
The military crumbled. And yet the people stayed. They stayed in the suffocating dust, chanting hymns to a silent sky.
That is the part that fascinates me. They stayed. I remember watching them from above, practically screaming, "Just turn around, walk back to the river. It is literally right over there."
But they could not.
I need you to explain the mechanism of this, because why wouldn't they just leave? I mean, it's a psychological prison, right?
It is.
Because of the invisible psychological prison they built alongside those physical temples. You see, once a system takes enough of your sacrifices, and I'm talking about the heavy currency of a life, your time, your physical health, the lives of your family, your core integrity, it owns you. If those citizens in the desert had packed up their belongings and walked back to the river, it would trigger what those brilliant human psychologists now call cognitive dissonance.
Precisely. The agonizing psychological clash of two completely incompatible truths.
Right. So how does the brain actually process it? It sounds like it would just short circuit.
It essentially does. Cognitive dissonance creates an unbearable tension. Truth one. I am a smart, faithful, capable person who makes good choices to protect my family.
Right, the baseline human ego.
Truth two. I just sacrificed my family's well-being, my wealth, and my future for an absolute mirage.
Ouch. Yeah, that is a clash.
To hold both of those thoughts at the exact same time creates a cognitive dissonance so sharp, so violently painful within the neural pathways that it feels like a literal physical blow to the identity.
It shatters the ego into pieces.
It does. So what does the mortal mind do to resolve this unbearable tension? It refuses the blow. Instead of facing the harsh reality of their mistake, they stay in the desert.
They convince themselves the starvation is not a failure, but a test of faith.
They alter their perception of reality to fit the sacrifice.
Rather than altering their behavior to fit reality.
It is a profound, tragic psychological alchemy. You turn your suffering into a false virtue. The more it hurts, the more you convince yourself the cause must be noble.
Wow. The great god of wisdom, Jehudi, could fill 1,000 infinite ledgers with the convoluted rationalizations humans invent simply to avoid admitting they were wrong.
He is quite busy with that, yes.
Okay, but let me challenge you on this. Starvation in an ancient desert is a pretty extreme scenario.
It is historical fact.
Right, but modern humans listening to this episode right now have data. They have analytics, performance reviews, human resources departments. Surely this ancient survival programming doesn't apply to a modern tech startup or a corporate marketing job.
The scenery has completely changed, my friend, but the architecture of the mortal mind has not evolved an inch.
Really, not an inch.
They have merely traded linen robes for business casual attire and stone temples for open-plan offices with artificial lighting. But the citizens of Amarna are still everywhere.
Okay, so who are the citizens of Amarna today?
Today, your financial markets and corporate cultures have a specific term for them. They call them the bag holders.
Oh, the bag holders, the modern martyrs of the marketplace.
They carry the dead weight of endeavors that should have been buried long ago.
Let's talk about them, because I see them every day. These are the professionals trapped in those incredibly toxic corporate cultures.
We see many of those souls.
Exhausted.
So exhausted. You know exactly the environment I mean. The boss is abusive, the hours are completely life-destroying, the company's ethics belong in the gutter. But the professional stays.
Because they have been there 5 years. Exactly. They convince themselves, oh, if I leave now, I lose my seniority. Or the stock options vest next year. Or they tell themselves the sheer prestige of having that company's name on their resume is worth the daily panic attacks and the stomach ulcer.
Or consider the founders of what your modern business world calls zombie startups.
Oh, a wonderfully fitting term, the undead enterprises.
Yes, the founders who have not had a single new customer in 18 months. The software clearly does not work. The market has politely declined their offering.
But they keep burning through their life savings and the savings of their friends, endlessly pouring good heart after bad heart.
Why can they not just look at the spreadsheet and close the laptop?
Right. Why can't they?
Because they are completely, utterly terrified of the pivot. In their minds, they have constructed a false, rigid binary.
Which is?
Either they succeed on their original unaltered path, or they are utter failures as human beings.
Oh, that is so heavy.
They view pivoting, which is simply changing direction based on new incoming evidence, not as the highly intelligent adaptation it actually is, but as a deep moral defeat.
And so they cling to the sinking ship.
And they use a very specific, very dangerous word to justify their continuing misery.
Let me guess. They say they have hope.
They do. They say, I am holding out hope that the market will turn.
Wow.
I must address this directly to every mortal listening. Hope is undeniably a divine gift. It is the vital, warm spark that allowed your ancient ancestors to survive the longest winters and the darkest nights of history.
It is a beautiful thing.
But I must issue a heavy, authoritative warning to you all. When hope is used merely as a psychological shield to mask a refusal to acknowledge raw data and reality,
Yeah.
it ceases to be a gift. It becomes a heavy, iron chain. It anchors you to the bottom of the sea, and while your lungs are filling with salt water, you stubbornly tell yourself you're simply learning to breathe water.
Oh, that is chilling. Learning to breathe water.
Yeah.
That is the absolute perfect description of what cognitive dissonance looks like in modern action.
It is a fatal illusion.
You are actively drowning in a toxic job or a failed business, but your ego says, no, I meant to do this. I'm building character. I'm evolving.
A dangerous lie.
So how do mortals break this chain? Once your brain has hijacked your free will and you've already bought the bad ticket and you've spent years wandering in your own personal desert, how do you unhijack yourself?
It requires submitting yourself to the ultimate assessment. You must fundamentally change how you measure your own worth.
Okay, how so?
You see, human culture constantly, dangerously mistakes blind persistence for virtue.
Oh, definitely.
You celebrate the one who never quits,
Mhm.
the one who bangs their head against the solid stone wall until either the wall or their own skull shatters. You write soaring anthems about never surrendering.
But this is a fatal romanticization of stubbornness. It's a completely flawed metric for success.
Exactly. These modern thinking humans, the researchers who study the healthy mortal mind, have found something quite beautiful.
What did they find?
Something that perfectly aligns with the deepest ancient wisdom. They have discovered that the ability to cleanly disengage from unreachable goals is actually a primary indicator of long-term psychological well-being.
Wait, really? The ability to disengage?
Yes. Knowing when to stop. Knowing when to lay down the heavy burden. Knowing when to look at a doomed endeavor and walk away. That is the true mark of a healthy, resilient spirit.
It is not weakness.
Not at all. The sheer strength required to look closely at your own failure and say, I was wrong and I am stopping today, is immense.
It's the ultimate reality check. And I want to remind you, dear listener, warmly but firmly, the cosmic scale is absolutely honest.
And misses nothing.
You know the scale I'm talking about. The great scale where Ma-et measures the absolute truth of a life against the weight of a feather.
They're a perfect balance.
You simply cannot buy a future with the ghost of your past mistakes. All those years you spend in the wrong job, or the toxic relationship, or building the failed product, they are gone. The time is spent.
The universe does not offer refunds.
Exactly. Spending another year being miserable isn't going to magically resurrect the 3 years you've already lost. It is just going to cost you year number 4.
You cannot bribe the universe with your suffering. The scale does not tilt in your favor simply because you endured a pain of your own making. Your persistence in absolute folly does not grant you retroactive wisdom.
So mortals, I want you to really truly examine your personal sacrifices today.
Look closely.
Look at the places in your life where you feel perpetually stuck, where you are bone tired, where you are pouring your precious energy into a void that never fills.
Ask yourself the hardest question.
Are you staying in your desert because you genuinely truly believe the sun will rise? Or are you just trying to protect your ego investment from a painful reality check? Are you defending a bad first brick because you are too proud to admit you built your house on a swamp?
A piercing question, but an absolutely necessary one for your psychological survival. Hear this final thought from one who has weighed countless souls, one who oversees the very end of all mortal endeavors.
Listen closely.
The desert of history is full of people who died waiting for a sun that was already cold. Do not let pride be your executioner. And more importantly, do not be the one who drags 1,000 others
Your family, your employees, your friends.
down into the sand with you just to avoid admitting your initial hypothesis was wrong. There is honor in the pivot. There is profound grace in surrender.
And consider this one final provocative thought before we leave you. Perhaps you need to learn the difference between a dip and a dead end.
A crucial distinction.
A dip is hard, yes, but it responds to your effort. You push, and things move, even slowly. A dead end just consumes your effort and asks for more. Nature itself demands that old forests burn so new seeds can take root. Quitting isn't always a failure. Sometimes it is the universe's required mechanism for your own evolution. You cannot build the new world until you are brave enough to abandon the ruins of the old one. Keep your hearts light, mortals, as light as a feather, because sometimes the absolute most virtuous thing you can do is to confidently exit the marketplace of sacrifices with nothing in your hands, nothing in your pockets, but your soul completely intact. Until next time, be brave enough to walk away.
We'll be watching the chain.